With 8 days to go up until the U.S. presidential elections, Republican Donald Trump has appealed to religious voters in the southern swing state of Georgia. His campaign has distanced itself from racist remarks by supporters that could alienate a key voter group. Speaking in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Harris has promised to offer an alternative to Trump's fear and divisiveness. Millions of Americans have already cast their vote before the November 5 election day, which national polls include the latest one from Reuters, Ipsos, and surveys in swing states show is a close race between Trump and his Democratic rival Kamala Harris.
Donald Trump yet again descended upon Atlanta with 8 days to go, in a state that is rapidly running out of voters to woo. Just before Trump took the stage on Monday afternoon, Georgia's early vote count crossed the 3 million mark. More than 40% of Georgia voters have already cast a ballot. About 5 million people voted in Georgia's 2020 presidential race. At the campaign rally, he described the Harris campaign as one of demonization and hate, then referred to her policies as radical, lunatic left policies.
Here are the facts. Kamala Harris is a radical left Marxist, rated even worse than crazy Bernie Sanders or Pocahontas herself. She destroyed our economy. She was an original creator of defund the police movement. And anybody who wants to defund the police for even 1 week is not worthy of being president of the United States.
Trump said he is not a Nazi, marked by hostile rhetoric against migrants and attacks on his perceived opponents.
And yet they use that word freely, both words. They use it, he's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi. I don't know.
Literally a floating island of garbage in the middle.
In latest news, Puerto Ricans lash over comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's racist remarks, where he referred to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage during one of Trump's recent rally at Madison Square Garden. Meanwhile, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in Ann Arbor, Michigan, urged young Americans to take up the fight for democracy from generations who had fought for freedom in the past. Her pitch to an audience of young voters, many of who were students from the nearby University of Michigan, was to use their vote in the upcoming United States election to protect their rights.
We are not going back. We are not going back. We're not going back. And we're not going back because we together will move forward to the future, because we believe in who we are and what is possible, and because we know it is time to turn the page.
Please welcome the next president of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Harris was introduced by her vice presidential running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris and Walz are trying to reach young voters, many of whom are casting ballots for the first time. Earlier in the day, Harris used her visit to Michigan to make a promise to review which federal jobs require a college degree if elected as president. She told workers at a semiconductor facility in Saginaw County the country needed to change the idea that certain jobs require college degrees.
And look, we are 8 days out from an election, so I just got to also talk about the contrast, because my opponent spends full time talking about just kind of diminishing who we are as America and talking down at people, talking about, I don't know, that we're the garbage can of the world. We're not.
In other news, police say they believe incidents in which drop boxes were set on fire, destroying hundreds of ballots in the states of Oregon and Washington, are linked. Meanwhile, President Biden has cast his vote early, joining more than 41 million Americans who have already voted. Bureau Report NewsX.
All right, so there you heard it. Joining me on the broadcast is Mr. Scott Faulkner, former Chief Admin Officer of the U.S. House of Representatives, also Director of Personnel for the Reagan campaign. Mr. Faulkner, thank you so much for taking our time to speak to us. I, of course, begin by asking you, as far as politics is concerned, a lot of it is narrative building. So whose narrative is taking the lead? Is it Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Right now, we'll see what Harris has to say this evening. I'm sure she'll be focusing on January 6th. But there's definitely been a shift in Trump's direction. A lot of the collection of what we call real clear politics surveys have actually shifted Arizona in Trump's direction. And so he seems to be getting traction and dominating the news cycles. Everything still seems to boil down to Pennsylvania, and that's still very much a wild card.
Mr. Faulkner, as far as some of the recent attacks against Donald Trump are concerned, calling him a fascist, calling him a Nazi even, or racist, in your perspective, is that really impacting the voter?
I really don't think so. I mean, when you look, if anyone actually watched any part of the Madison Square Garden rally, there were Israeli flags flying. There were people with yarmulkes. There were Jewish people on the stage. I mean, how can you be a Nazi and have Israeli flags? This attack is just so ludicrous, and I think most people realize it's ludicrous.
At the same time, Mr. Faulkner, immigration, of course, seems to be a pretty important issue, given as far as these elections are concerned. So, policy-wise, in your understanding, who is really being able to convince the voters as far as immigration is concerned? On the one hand, you have Donald Trump promising a very strict immigration policy, while on the other hand, you have Kamala Harris, who says that America will continue to flourish the way it has been for the past 4 years under the Democrats, and there's really no need for them to have a stern look into the immigration policy. So who, as per you, is being able to convince the voter on that front?
Most surveys show Trump up almost 15 to 20 points among voters trusting him to handle the immigration crisis over Harris. Immigration is listed anywhere from number 2 to number 3 as an issue of concern in this country, primarily because of the uptick in various crimes, especially murders, that are being conducted by illegal immigrants. Again, the key thing here, and this is where the left-wing media and Harris try to say it's immigration. No, it's illegal immigration. Americans, and certainly conservatives and Republicans, welcome legal immigrants. We need immigrants, especially for the ones that are highly technical. I mean, all of my medical personnel are immigrants from South Asia. I mean, either India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. I mean, a large core of America's health delivery is now from these immigrants who are coming in well-trained and dedicated to serving the medical needs of Americans. So it's never been about immigration, it's been about illegal immigration.
At the same time, Mr. Faulkner, there has also been a recent controversy as far as voter IDs are concerned. And why do you think that this particular path was chosen, where certain states are allowing for voting to take place without a voter ID, which again was created into a major debate by the Republicans?
Well, certainly like West Virginia, you're required to show your driver's license. Voter ID is extremely important. You want to make sure that the people who are voting are who they say they are. You want to make sure that voting is done in a way that there is 100% certainty that the people who are eligible to vote, and that those votes are counted properly. There's a lot of questions that have been raised about the 2020 election. There's questions, and right now, 2 major legal challenges happening in the United States. They'll probably be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court this next week, where they've been trying to clean the voter rolls, especially in Virginia, and have found, something like 1,600 people who actually in their own official records have stated that they are in this country illegally.
At the same time, Mr. Faulkner, do you think the Puerto Rican vote is perhaps going to be a significant factor in deciding the decision of the swing states?
We certainly, what you're going to probably lead toward is the opening act, who's a comedian I'd never heard of before, out of a 6-hour program, said something very insulting about Puerto Rico. He's an actually insult comic. I don't know why anyone would put him on the stage in a political rally. But the key is that you have large swaths of Puerto Rican voters in the New York City area, in the Philadelphia area, and in Florida. Now, of those three, clearly the Philadelphia area Puerto Rican community is going to be a huge impact on how Pennsylvania goes. So this inflating of one really stupid joke by one really stupid comic at the very beginning of a 6-hour political program, the Democrats are obviously going to try to do as much with this as possible. I'm sure it'll be mentioned again tonight at the Harris rally.
Okay, Mr. Faulkner, one last question to you before we let you go. We want to understand Donald Trump promising further tariffs on imports. Kamala Harris, her policy focused on increasing wealth tax. What really, as per you, will be more beneficial to the American economy?
I think the key is that we have had a lot of countries, especially China, exploit our open and free trade policies. And so there's always been a debate about tariffs going back into the 19th century. And so so the key is how they're applied, who they're applied to, as to whether it will bring jobs and manufacturing back to the United States or drive up prices. And that's still a very lively discussion between economists right now.
Mr. Faulkner, thank you so much for joining us on NewsX with that perspective coming in right from the United States of America. We leave it there and we shift our focus to ultimately what matters in any election, that is the numbers. We're looking at Trump versus Harris. As far as the TIPS tracking poll is concerned, it's a neck and neck competition as far as the current numbers are concerned, viewers. 48% claim that Kamala Harris will win, 48% for Donald Trump. So like I said, neck and neck as far as the TIPS tracking poll is concerned. USA Today or Suffolk give 47% of the vote to Harris, 48%. So Donald Trump in the lead as far as USA Today is concerned. Let's look at some more numbers. ABC News Ipsos is predicting a slight victory there for Kamala Harris at 49% and the rating for Donald Trump at 47%. So those are the numbers. CBS News gives it away to Kamala Harris. Again, a 1% difference, 50% for Kamala Harris, 49% for Donald Trump. So these are the big numbers that we're looking at. As far as the Puerto Rican vote is concerned, which has become a bit of a controversy, let's look at the numbers. Our source is the CNN presidential results for 2020. Now, one of the key swing states, Arizona, the population was 0.8%, but Biden's victory margin from Arizona was just 0.4%. So this really gives you an idea of how that Puerto Rican vote will work out. We'll then look at Georgia, the population at 1.2% and the victory margin 0.3% once again. So that really gives us a better perspective on how that Puerto Rican vote is going to work out. So close to the election, certain comments have been made. Michigan, we're looking at a population of less than 1%. We're looking at 0.5%, but the victory margin was also less than 1%, a victory margin of 0.8%. That's a very, very close call as far as that particular state is concerned. Nevada, population of 1%. Once again, the victory margin was 0.4% as far as Nevada is concerned. And this, of course, gives us a glimpse into what that Puerto Rican vote could do. We're also looking at Pennsylvania, population at 3.6%, but the victory margin was a mere 0.2%. Once again, a very, very close victory margin there. What's really interesting are these numbers, viewers. Wisconsin, 1.2% is the Puerto Rican population, but the victory margin for the Democrats in 2020 was 0.4%. So these are the big numbers, and as far as some of the polls are concerned, like I said, it's a neck and neck fight. A week to go for the polls, but it seems that the polling agencies feel that till date they're not being able to predict a very clear winner. With that, let me, of course, go right back across to some more guests that are joining us on the broadcast. I'm being joined by Jordan Cope, who's the Qatari Fellow at the Middle East Forum. Jordan, thank you so much for speaking to us. I want to begin by asking you, do you think the Puerto Rican vote is going to be a significant factor in deciding who will win in the swing states?
This is a big question right now. I think
Yes.
obviously as elections get nearer and nearer, both parties tend to always try to find crises to create in order to mine critical votes for each other's political party. I think the Puerto Rican vote, where it's going to count most, is where the populations really are at the largest, which of course is in Florida, a state that is very much predicted to vote for Trump. Perhaps in some other states in the Northeast as well, such as New York, where there's a strong Puerto Rican concentration. New York, of course, will probably vote Democrat, as it has in recent elections. There is a somewhat sizable population in Pennsylvania, I believe approximately 90,000. The question is that going to be such a substantial difference maker in this critical swing state? I honestly don't know. And it should be noted that Puerto Rico, even though it's a US entity itself, does not play a role overall in the electoral college and how the final outcome will be determined.
Okay.
What will matter is the Puerto Rican voters in the United States who can vote in presidential elections, but the impact will remain determined.
Okay. Jordan, how do you view the Democrats then attacking Donald Trump? They've called him a fascist, they've called him a Nazi, they've called him a racist. Do you feel that it's creating any impact on the voter?
I think it's totally fine to criticize a presidential candidate, whether on one party or the other. But I think such characterizations are unhealthy to the fabric of our democracy, which ultimately depends on the free exchange of ideas and ultimately truth. And when people decide to distort or abuse the truth, they not only bear impact on the current elections in a negative manner, but also discredit the suffering that millions underwent in World War II. And as a Jew personally myself, I can't stand hearing when people make Hitler comparisons to one political candidate or the other. It denigrates the suffering of the victims of the Holocaust. It's tremendously not useful nor productive to understanding some of the worst atrocities that ever happened in history. And it's important that as Americans, that it's totally fine to criticize each other's candidate, but we must remain tactful and united as a country in doing so and understand that at the end of the day, we're all in this together. And we have to be as accurate as possible when making one of the most important decisions that will impact our future for years to come.
Jordan, do you think then somewhere Trump's immigration policy could be resonating with the voters? Is that what you're picking up from the ground?
I think for many Americans right now, with inflation through the roof and illegal immigration at an apparently all-time high, I believe approximately 11 million illegal immigrants, undocumented migrants, have moved to America under the Biden administration. It is a very serious concern to many Americans who are underemployed, who are struggling to put food on the table and to find jobs that ultimately they can benefit from at a level comparable to the professional experience that they have. I do think immigration has been pulled to have been one of the top factors of concerned voters in this current election. I do think it will sway many, and many in some current swing states, such as Arizona and Nevada, might be impacted. Many working class Americans in the Midwest, such as Wisconsin, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, in these pivotal swing states, might be affected less by immigration, more so by economics, but many would argue that they go hand in hand.
All right, talking about the economy, Jordan, Trump's tariff plan on imports versus Kamala Harris's policy to increase the wealth tax, what really, in your perspective, will be more beneficial to the American economy?
It's definitely a tricky question. I would argue that Trump's tariff plan probably would impact America more positively if I had to choose from both of which. Generally, many economists would support a more laissez-faire free market style economy overall. However, many Americans also realize that unfortunately some countries, such as China, have currency and trade controls that adversely impact trade with the United States. And many Americans feel that they have been disadvantaged by tariffs, whether it be with China imposing unfair trade practices against the U.S. Many Americans believe Mexico, with some of its former trade practices towards the U.S. through NAFTA, were not beneficial to the United States. I can only see, unfortunately, a wealth tax undermining industry in America. Many of our businesses have moved overseas for better or for worse, but ultimately that impacts the American economy and job prospects significantly. So it's important for America to be able to retain its jobs as the leader of the free democratic world. At least many would agree with that statement. It's important that America is able to retain its jobs to ensure that its population maintains jobs that are not only in number, but those that correspond with professional experience. So I would argue that, unfortunately, Harris's wealth tax will unfortunately undermine America's economic prospects, job prospects, and America probably should be concerned.
Okay, Jordan, I also want to bring in your perspective on abortion, which has been another major stickler as far as this particular election is concerned. Do you somewhere feel that majority of American women may end up backing Kamala Harris for her pro-abortion position?
I don't think so much abortion is the number one polling matter that is atop of most Americans' minds. It is something of very much importance. By what I've seen, it tends to be economics and immigration. I would imagine inflation up there as well. When it comes to most American women, I'm not quite sure how they will vote in the ballot box, but it should be reminded to audience members that in the United States, the president himself does not have the direct say over abortion. What the president in the United States has, according to his role, is authority over foreign policy and the ability to make executive orders which implement the law that's already in place. And so when it comes to abortion, that's a right that the Supreme Court has effectively ruled is reserved for the states to determine at the state level. Not for the president, not for the federal level in so as much. And so it might be an important matter for voters, but it won't actually impact the realities on the ground.
Okay, Jordan, before we let you go, one last question. Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, whose foreign policy will benefit America more?
If it's just merely alone on foreign policy, it seems that many Americans would probably align more so with Trump over Harris. The Biden administration, of which Harris is a part of, has caused a huge stir, especially with Muslim voters in the United States, which, while only comprising approximately 1% of the US general population, very much play an important role in the swing state of Michigan, a pivotal state. Many are upset with the ongoing war in the Middle East. Many in that community would blame the Harris administration, the Biden administration, and will be voting for a third-party candidate instead in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona, all critical swing states. Many Jewish Americans are quite undecided how to vote. Many believe that the unfortunate consequences of the war and the intensifying anti-Semitism in the United States will cause probably many to vote less so for the Democratic candidate than they have in recent years, although still supporting the Democratic candidate Harris at large. And so foreign policy, I've written an article previously about the current administration's policies in the Middle East, basically predicting all the consequences that have now occurred and the devastation of the decision to undesignate the Houthis, to flirt with Iran and trying to restore a JCPOA nuclear deal, and restoring aid, unfortunately, to Palestinian government agencies which appear to have been correlated to sponsorship of terrorism. So this ongoing war in the Middle East certainly is likely attributable to US policy, and it is my hope that whoever governs the United States in the next administration will better understand the consequences of actions that America can make, especially in the Middle East and ultimately through the Middle East to the greater world.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.